We are in the middle of a series. If this is your first time here with us, we've been for the last several weeks tracking with a series we've entitled Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. And this simple title, it comes from a book that was written by, we are a partner church of North Point Community Church. And Andy Stanley, who's the lead pastor of North Point, he authored this book by the same title, a book that has just been, it's a phenomenal read. If you don't like to read, all you got to do is just track with us through the message series, and we give you the cliff notes, and we help you on your journey. But man, my book is highlighted because there's so much remarkable wisdom that has been poured into this simple little read. In fact, the whole basis of the series, the whole basis of where we've been going is around this simple idea. Because many of us often overlook the connection between good questions and good decisions. We often overlook the reality that when we really begin to ask good questions, it will help us make better decisions. And isn't it true, when we make better decisions, ultimately one of the things we're going to be able to do is we're going to have better decisions and live lives with fewer regrets. In fact, one of the underarching realities of this is, and it's something I'm convinced of and something that I've seen lived out in many different lives, it's this idea that if we will just ask these questions, we'll answer honestly, and then we'll act accordingly, will really help us to make better decisions. If we'll ask and answer honestly and act accordingly, it will help us to have a better life. In fact, it'll not just help us in this journey, but it'll help the people around us. I mean, isn't it true, the decisions you make, while many of the decisions we make, we tend to think that these decisions uniquely affect me and me alone. But isn't it true that the decisions we make often have ramifications that go beyond just me? They go into my family, into my marriage. They go into my workplace. They go beyond just me. And the regrets in many instances show themselves in every relationship I have. So ultimately, if we'll ask and answer honestly and we'll act upon the questions, I really believe that we'll be able to live lives that really are better and have fewer regrets. So just to catch you up on where we've been, this is part 5. Next week, we'll be concluding our series online only. But to catch you up, I want to share just a couple of the questions we asked. Week 2, the first week, I'm sorry, I'm stepping on cords. I've been trying to, that's my fault. There we go. Anyway, question 1, we dealt with the integrity question. The simple idea that, am I being honest with myself? Am I being honest with myself? And we actually added another word to this because this wasn't potent enough. Am I being honest with myself really? When you think about the relationships you're in, am I being honest with myself? When you think about the purchase you want to make, am I being honest with myself about the decisions I'm making? Am I being honest with myself about where I'm living? Am I being honest with myself about the job I'm taking? Am I being honest with myself really? And the next question we dealt with the following week was the legacy question. And it's the question of, what story do I want my life to tell? When it comes to making a decision, what story do I want my life to tell? I mean, all of us, if we're honest, we want the story of our life to be a story worth sharing. We want the story of our life to be a story that our kids would be proud of. We want the story of our life to be a story that inspires other people to do remarkable things. So when we're faced with a decision, one of the best questions we can think about is the legacy that is on the other side of the decision. What story do I want my life to tell? And then last week, we dealt with the conscious question, the inside, internal reality. In fact, the question we asked is there a tension that deserves my attention? And we've all felt that. Maybe you were about to make a purchase and everything felt good on the outside, but there was just something rattling on the inside. There was a tension on the inside that you're sitting there saying, I just don't know. And that tension doesn't necessarily have to be a red flag, but sometimes there's tensions within us that deserve our attention. Why do I have this tension on the inside? What is on the other side? There are tensions inside of us when we're about to make decisions that I think it is worthy of us to investigate and to figure out, why is this a tension inside? Why is this a big deal? Which brings us to today, question number 4 on our journey. In fact, question number 4 is the relationship question. It's the question that stirs around every relationship we have. The fascinating thing about all of these questions is they're terrifyingly clarifying. I mean, if we're really honest with ourselves, with every single question we've asked, we kind of have an understanding of what the answer is. There's clarity around what we should do. I mean, when we think about the story we want to tell, there's clarity when it comes to that story. When we think about am I being honest with myself? And we can normally, just with a head nod or a head shake, we're like, okay, I am being honest. Nobody will know. There is great clarity around all these questions. But you know what I found is with that clarity comes a terrifying reality. Because isn't it true that we are accountable to the answers we know? And maybe with this question, more than any of them, this question is remarkably clarifying. But it is terrifying when we begin to ask and to answer honestly and then to act on it. In fact, this question right here, it will require the most of us. It will require the most of us because we all know what the answer is. We know what's on the other side. We don't have to act about it. We don't have to really deal with it. We owe it to ourselves to know the answer to this question. And the reason is because what you won't know can hurt you. When it comes to the answers to this question, we owe it to ourselves to ask the question, to think honestly. We owe it to ourselves because if we don't ask what we won't know, it can hurt us. And invariably, it'll hurt those closest to us. So again, today we're going to be going over the relationship question, a question that is so valuable because when we think about our preferred future, I don't know many people that their preferred future is void of relationships. We always have relationships on the other side, our preferred future. When we envision the future that we have, we envision a future with relationships. Maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's kids, maybe it's a better relationship with kids. We're always thinking about the future us from a perspective of the relationships that we have. And when we begin to ask this question, here's what's cool is this question will help us become the very thing that the people we hope to be around are looking for. In fact, I would say it this way, that this question, when we really begin to investigate and interrogate this question, it has the ability to raise your and mine. It has the ability to raise our amazing quotient. And I mean, don't we all want to be amazing? Better yet, don't we all want the people around us to be amazing? So if that's the case, shouldn't we hold ourselves to the same standard of those around us? And the fascinating thing about this question is this, is it has the ability not just to make yourself amazing, but it has the power to enhance not just the marital relationship or relationship with kids. It has the power to enhance every relationship. It has the power to restore relationships, to heal a broken relationship. It has the power to rekindle the romance. It has the power to instill value or fortitude within a relationship that's on the rocks. It has remarkable opportunities if we just put it together. But it comes with another disclaimer. With every other question, there's a little bit of on the other side of answering the question, there is value, there's excitement, there's almost guarantees. The problem with this question is there's not an ROI. There's not necessarily a return on your investment. When you think about the question we're going to talk about today, it doesn't come with a guarantee. I mean, every other question, when you think about what story do I want my life to tell? I mean, on the other side of asking that question and answering honestly and acting upon it, you're going to live a better life. On the other side of being honest with yourself, really, you know what you're going to do is you're going to be honest with yourself, really, and you're going to make decisions that lead to fewer regrets and a better life. There is an ROI, maybe not immediately, but over the long term, there definitely is. But when we come to today's question, there's not an ROI. There's not a real positive return on the investment. But here's what today's question does. Today's question is not necessarily about you as much as it's about the ones beside you. Today's question, when we live it out, what it does is it positions you not just to make your relationships better, but it positions you to make the world better. And I know that seems like a very idealistic statement, but I believe it's to be true because I've seen what has been on the other side when Jesus instilled this question. Speaking of Jesus, this is kind of where we get today's question. You know, throughout Jesus' ministry, one of the things that was fascinating about Jesus is he was sharing parables, he was teaching, he was encouraging, he was inspiring others about something new, something unworldly, something crazy. And in that day, everybody that was looking to him for answers, they were looking to him because they said, this is the Messiah, this is our king. I mean, this is the guy that's coming to restore Jerusalem, to restore Israel back to where it's supposed to be. He is our king. He's going to undermine all other kingdoms. And Jesus is like, no, wait a second. The kingdom I'm coming to instill is not a kingdom of this world. It's not merely political reform. It's so much better than that. It's more inclusive than that. It's so much richer than just simply political reform in our culture today. In fact, Jesus, when he would enter to different cities, he'd go into Jerusalem, he would go up and down the bay. Everywhere Jesus went, there were crowds that followed him. There were crowds everywhere. In fact, I would encourage you, if you are looking for something to read, if you're looking, hey, Scott, I would love to try to read something in the Bible, where would you recommend? I would encourage you to go to Mark. Mark is an individual who he got his information from Peter and he began writing a document about the life of Jesus. And when you're reading the account of Mark, circle every single time Mark mentions crowds. You're going to find in almost every chapter of Mark, Mark mentions the fact that there are crowds around Jesus everywhere. And so everywhere that he went, he had these crowds. He was encouraging them. They're thinking, this is the guy. You see, the expectations were significant. The expectations were this world. They were regal. They were messianic. They were very much political. But you see, Jesus, he had their attention. But you know what? They didn't understand his intentions. They didn't understand why Jesus was here. And it was even true of the 12, of the apostles. The apostles, the inner boys, the guys Jesus hung out with, even in those final moments with Jesus on the earth before he was crucified, they were jockeying for position. They're trying to figure out, okay, so is now the time you're going to overthrow the government? Is now the time that we can begin to bat ourselves on the chest and say, we're with him? And Jesus is like, no. In fact, at Passover, one of the greatest Jewish traditions of that time, a time where they remembered how when God came down and saved the Israelites from the Egyptians, Jesus rallied the 12 together. And he rallies them together and he begins to encourage them and teach them. In fact, he tells them first, he says, guys, I'm leaving. To which had to shock them completely. I mean, everywhere they went, there were crowds. And so crowds signified safety because the Roman rulers, the Jewish authorities, they weren't going to come after a mob of people. They knew that was not in their best interest. But if the leader left and the crowds dispersed, it left the 12 kind of sitting there saying, uh-oh. So Jesus looks at them and he says, I want you to know I'm about to leave. And then he goes on to share his intentions with the 12. And he shares words that have become oh so familiar for many of us. They've become so familiar that I fear that even just mentioning them, that we would say, oh yeah, I know that. Oh yeah, duh, that makes sense. Yeah, I've read that before. But when Jesus was speaking these words to his disciples, he was speaking them as a leader upon individuals that are hungry for answers. And so when we look at today's command, we look at what Jesus says, I want you to imagine that they're coming from the lips of your Lord. Because in the audience that Jesus was speaking to, that is exactly how it was received, was this teacher, this individual. And see, this is a big deal for me. It's a big deal for you because at the other side of this question, I mean, when I mess up, when I fall short, when I know that I have broken God's heart, what am I am desperate for? I go before God. I'm like, God, I have sinned, and I'm so grateful for the cross. I'm so grateful for the death and resurrection of Jesus because I understand that through that Jesus has made a way for my sin to be no more. And so every time I mess up, I am so grateful for this very promise. I mean, what Jesus leans into is at the epicenter of our reality. What Jesus leans into right now is at the epicenter of Christianity. What Jesus is about to lean into is the very thing that the disciples had their marching orders and gives us confidence and gives us encouragement and gives us that peace of mind when we have regrets. And Paul, he would take these words and he would go to the church at Galatia and would say, the only thing that matters are these words. And he would go to the church in 1 Corinthians and say, if you only get one thing right, make sure it is this. You see, Paul understood. Jesus, his words were deep. His words were passionate. And Paul and the disciples, they saw this question from a perspective I don't think any of us could have ever seen it. They saw this question posed, lived out by an individual who willingly gave up their life. They see the question being asked, and then on the other side of the question, they see their teacher, their rabbi, willingly giving up his life, calling his own death, and then going before the people and being crucified. They saw this lived out. And they saw masters of crucifixions. They saw individuals that understood that when we get you to the point of death, mercy would be letting you die, but we want to pull the sword out a little bit so that you can feel the pain even more. And Jesus went through this because this is something he felt necessary. You see, Jesus came to share our intentions. Jesus came to turn the world upside down. So when Jesus rallies these troops, when he rallies the 12, he shares something that I want to encourage you. As we read these words, would you do me a favor? Would you listen to it as if this is the first time you've ever heard it? Would you listen to this as if this was the first time that you're sitting in the middle of this room and you're with this individual who you have messianic intentions for, and yet he comes and he drops this bombshell on you? Here's what he said. A new command I give you. Which is interesting because he's speaking to these individuals. I mean, he had just they're trying to figure out, Jesus, what do we do? What do we do? How do we make sense of this? And Jesus is like, okay, listen, I know you've got all these Jewish commands, but here's the deal. If you take all the Jewish commands, you boil them into two commands, it's love God and love people. Love God, love people. If you just get those two things right, it's perfect. So, okay, I've got all these commands, but if I boil them down, let's do this. And then Jesus is like, wait a second. I want to give you a new command. But you see, Jesus didn't necessarily come to give commands. Jesus didn't come to add to. And I feel that one of the reasons that this command it gets lost in translation is because many times we add this to all the other commands. You see, Jesus came and he said, this is what I want you to know. A new command I'm giving you today. A new command I give you to love one another, to which we're like, Okay, sounds good. Heard that before. But you see, Jesus didn't give them a command to feel. He didn't give them I want you to feel lovey-dovey. He gave them a command to do. And in fact, he gave them a command that said, I want you to love one another. And then he goes and he describes how he wants them to love. He wants them to love in such a way that will turn the world upside down because he sees exactly what can happen. He says, as I have loved you, to which they're like, okay, so you must love one another. When I read that, my natural inclination is to go straight to the cross. As I have loved you, okay, this is a pretty weighty command, right? But you think about the men in the room. Not a single one had seen the crucifixion yet. You know what they were thinking about? They were thinking about what life was like before they interacted with this teacher, this rabbi. We think about the cross. I mean, Jesus could have easily looked at Matthew and said, hey, Matthew, do you remember what your life was like before I interacted with you? Yeah, I remember. I was a tax collector. Nobody liked me. And you remember what I asked you? I said, yeah, I remember. You asked me to follow you. Nobody ever asked a tax collector to follow them. If I'm following somebody, they tend to run faster, yet you wanted me to follow you. You're right. Peter, do you remember where you were? James, do you remember what was going on in your world? John, do you remember? I mean, you were the sons of thunder. And yet I came and I offered you a new way forward. I looked past your insecurity. I looked past your fear, and I invited you to follow me. Let me ask you, what was life like for you before you interacted with Jesus? I mean, we easily go back to the cross. But for me, when I think about my life, there's no way I can hold anybody to a lower standard than what Jesus has already held me to. Which means I've gotten so many second and third chances from Jesus. Which means when somebody upsets me and I try to draw the line, I've got to look back and see the grace that Jesus has offered me. And what Jesus could have said, and he didn't, but he could have said, as I have loved you, you must love one another. You want me to show you what this love is? I know you don't understand what this love looks like, but I'm about to put on a demonstration of this love for you that's going to take your breath away, but it's also going to take your sin away. You see, if we can get this right, if we can get this right, this could change our world. He says, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. By this, in fact, this is a demonstrative pronoun. Basically, it is wanting to point at something very specific. In fact, in this case, it is very singular. If by this new ethic of love, by this new brand of love, if this would just characterize you, this is the way that you as a follower of Jesus are to be known. By this new brand of love, by this one another love, by this love others as Jesus has loved us first, forgive others as Jesus has forgiven us. If we would just get this right, this is what we are to be known for. This is to be the stark contrast between all other religions. In fact, according to what Jesus said that night, Jesus' followers would demonstrate their devotion to God by putting the person next to them in front of them. If we really want to get this right, if we want to live out this authentic following Jesus, if we want to understand the one commandment that Jesus turned the world upside down around, it's that we should demonstrate the devotion to God by putting the person next to them in front of them. Isn't it true that this is very hard to do? That for us to authentically follow Jesus, it involves us looking more at the people next to us and seeing what we can do to help than it is for us to constantly be in a vertical state where we're just constantly begging God, God, can you help me? God, can you help me? And he's wanting you to answer to prayers. He's wanting you to step out. He's wanting you to demonstrate your devotion to God by putting the person next to you in front of you. You see, this stirred the first century followers of Jesus. Jesus could have easily guilted them and said, "Do you know what you're supposed to do? Listen, I'm perfect. Have you seen me mess up? Have I ever created a regret with you?" But you see, Jesus didn't consider equality with man as something to be grasped, but instead he considered himself a servant. And so why did the disciples choose to obey this command? Well, they chose to obey it because he loved them first. Because Jesus showcased love to them first. A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. You see, Jesus' command, it's a lot more simple than the overarching system of the day, especially in the Jewish culture. But this command is so demanding. In fact, it brings us to our relationship question. The question you've probably heard me ask before, but the question that can stir and help every relationship around, a question that is mutually beneficial and mutually satisfying in every relationship that we have. There's inescapable clarity around this simple question. And the question is this: what does love require of me? This question should stand guard over your conscience. This question should inform how we date, how we marry. This question should inform how we coach, how we teach. This question should create a perimeter around the words that we say, the way that we use our words. This question should create within us marching orders on how to treat our neighbors, our colleagues, our coworkers, our spouse, dare I say our kids. And the startling thing about this question is there's many times where I'm trying to figure out, what does the Bible say? What does the Bible say? There's many times that I'm trying to figure out, like I'm looking for loopholes, right? I want to figure out, okay, this is what I want to do, and I want to find a verse that basically justifies my stupidity. But you know what the problem is? This verse, it crushes the justification that we all give ourselves. In fact, this question, but the Bible doesn't say there's anything wrong with fill in the blank. How many times have we played that card? We've justified the reality for me to maybe undermine somebody else, or maybe to be selfish or to be lazy, just because the Bible doesn't say there's anything wrong with. This question exposes our hypocrisy. It's so simple, yet it's so demanding. It's so simple, but yet it's so challenging. So, relationally speaking, when you're unsure of what to say or do, ask what love requires of you. When you're unsure of what to say or do, just ask, what does love require of you? And then ask, answer honestly, and then act. When you fall short, when you've done something to cause a regret, own it quickly. When you've done something that you know that you've hurt somebody else, ask for forgiveness. Celebrate when envy is there. Make sure that you are going out of your way to confess whenever you know that there's a tension or a hurdle. Do everything you can, because when you're unsure of what to say or do, just ask, what does love require of me? You see, the authors of the New Testament, Paul and Peter and John, they took this one command and they didn't add commands to it. They simply applied what this really looks like. In fact, Paul, when he was writing to the church of Galatia, we referenced it earlier, and he said, when it comes to relationships, the Spirit of God is always going to nudge you towards kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. When it comes to your relationships, the Spirit of God, the Spirit inside of you is going to nudge you towards these realities. And then he goes to the church at Corinth and he writes an even bigger, an even greater explanation of what love looks like to the church at Corinth. And it's challenging. It's encouraging. It's a chapter you probably have all heard. You've probably read. You might have even had it read at your wedding. You might have been like, I'm not having it read at my wedding because everybody reads it at their weddings. I don't know where you stand. But listen to how Paul explained love. It's almost as if he was explaining the qualities of Jesus. He says, love's patient. It's kind. Love doesn't boast. It's not envious. It's not proud. Love does not dishonor others. Love never treats another person dishonorably, disgracefully, or indecently. Love never treats another person dishonorably, disgracefully, or indecently. Love never treats another person dishonorably, disgracefully, or indecently. And you know why love doesn't do that? Because Jesus never treated anybody dishonorably, disgracefully, or indecently. You see, love does not create regret. Love is not self-seeking. It doesn't keep score. In fact, love conveniently forgets the bad and always errs on the side of good. Love never smuggles anything harmful into a relationship. In fact, love works to protect the relationship. Love always hopes. It always perseveres. It always protects. And then he would go on to say, love never fails. See, and the reason that Paul would look at the church at Galatia and the church at Corinth is because when Paul saw Jesus raise the standard, he understood through these individuals that were treated enormously well. He said, okay, this is what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus. If we only get one thing right, I want to make sure that we err on the side of love. If we only get one thing right, I want to be individuals that turn the world upside down because of the selfless love that was showcased for all to see by our rabbi, our teacher, by Jesus, when he selflessly took on the cross and then says, love others as I have loved you. You see, this last question, this question about relationships, it is very simple. It's clarifying. I mean, many of us know exactly what is required of us when we ask the question, what does love require of you? But isn't it terrifying to think of acting on the answer? And as I said at the beginning, we owe it to ourselves to know the answer. And it's going to be a question that we're tempted to just ignore, but it's a question that if we will live out can change our relationships, restore broken relationships, encourage hurting relationships. It can bring up the amazing quotient in every relationship we have if we will just live this one question out. What does love require of me? Would you pray with me? God, we love you. And we thank you so much for the fact that you are a big God. And God, I know that there are so many times that I fall short of this question. God, I try desperately to be able to love like you love me, to forgive like you forgave me, to provide grace like you've given me, to be able to really live out this one simple yet demanding question. And God, in the midst of just overwhelming turmoil, this one ethic changed the world and gave us the ability some 2,000 years later to be standing in a movie theater and reminding reminding me how potent this question can be and how it genuinely can change the world. So God, I pray that you would inspire us, that you would encourage us, that we would look at your selfless love and we would act accordingly. God, we love you. We thank you. And God, we need you. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
are gone.